you could take your seats, please.
Seats. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, could you please take your seats? We're about to begin.
There we are. We seem to have lost all the people who were sitting there. I think they've moved over there for some reason. Right. Good, okay, well this is our fourth and final panel, but don't start relaxing because this is where we pull a lot of these things together, where we look to the future. It has been entitled, Can He Deliver? Although that's almost too corny for me to repeat, but so I'm not going to say that again, but it's clearly about the future with the new Mayor of London. He's put housing front and centre of his campaign to get into City Hall, especially affordable housing, and homes for Londoners has been a much repeated phrase. So again, we have an extremely well-informed and experienced panel here. We've got Tony Pidgley, who will kick things off, chairman of Barclay, probably London's most influential house builder, or so I'm told. Worked closely with Boris, obviously will want to work closely with any mayor. Has views about stamp duty changes and many other things. What percentage of affordable housing, whatever the definition is of that, should private builders be expected to deliver is one of the things that we can discuss in this session. We also have from Legal and General, on my right, we have James Lydgate, investing a lot in the housing sector, including in the build-to-rent sector. From Lang O'Rourke, we have Stephen Trussler, strong proponents of factory-built housing. We have on my far right there Darren Rodwell of Barking and Dagenham Council, who can give local authority thoughts on the mayor's housing plans, and his borough has some massive house building plans. And we've got Michael Scobby from Hansgrohe, a high-end supplier of taps and showers, so a big player in the supply chain, and an event sponsor for us this morning, and very big on sustainability. So we're talking not just how many new homes London builds, but how we build them as well. And then if all goes to plan, towards the end of this session, we will have here James Murray, the Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development, somebody who's already been mentioned quite a bit in our earlier sessions, absolutely key player now in London on everything we've been talking about. So provided he gets here in time, he will be last up. He will lay out the plans of his boss, which the other panelists may have already praised or denounced before he gets here. Who knows? But I'm sure there will be plenty to say, as in all the previous sessions. So, Tony, would you like to start us off on any and all of these subjects?
Oh, thank you very much. You must remember today I'm wearing two hats. I'm not only chairman of Barclay, I've got to represent the London Chamber here today. My team are here today, and they said if you start any speeches without promoting the Chamber, you're fired. So it's a good start. I actually think it's about many things. There's no silver bullet to this. There's no one answer, as we all know in this room. Equally, though, I think it is about how do we address the challenge of additionality? How do we get affordability? Focus on delivery, more homes at prices that people can generally afford. Let's concentrate on the volume and the quality of homes. Let's get the placemaking right. You know, this trying to extract more value is not the answer. You know, get momentum. I mean, if I had a simple solution about it, I actually believe if they just let the supply loose, you know, let's face into building the 50, 60,000 homes they need. Let the supply loose. Capture the value afterwards once they've got the market established. Because, you know, none of us will stand up and say it today, but I suspect everybody in the audience today that's in pure house building is worried about stamp duty, the effect it's having on their product. You know, we've got to talk about capturing that value and working together. Sills. None of us talk about sills. Well, let's talk about sills, shall we? I mean, the community infrastructure levy. At the end of the day, that was left to the 30-odd boroughs. We need to think about it. Some boroughs are sensible. You know, Darrell wants housing. Darrell will be sensible about it. He recognises the impact on it. Other London boroughs that are richer, who don't want housing, it's a great way to stop planning. So we have to address this politics and the arguments that go on about this at the end of the day. But, you know, I got one site in a certain borough. The sills are £100 million. If you add to that, the landowner will keep the land. Why would he sell the land? It's a national grid site, it's contaminated, he's got to build a new depot, or they have. Why decant? Why move away at the end of the day? So, you know, understand the challenge the industry's got. Understand getting the process into it at the end of the day. So I think sills is a real challenge to affordability. I think it's a real challenge to the affordable homes. Right. Stamp duty. Well, I think that's interesting. That's a transitional tax. Whatever we want to say, that's a tax on transactions. It's a tax that's unfair. I mean, the Chancellor will argue, and I saw him yesterday, and he was very elegant about it. I was very impressed with his debate about it. 98%, another statistic at the bottom end. But at the very end, where they want affordability, and we all know it in the industry, they've got inflation. You know, we don't have enough at the bottom end. I wish we had more. Right? The top end in London is hard work. It was always going to be hard work, and we have to recognise it. But what we have to recognise, do we want London to be a world-class city? Do we want to keep those bankers in London? Do we want people to come here? Are we open for business at the end of the day? We have to decide. And at the end of the day, right, that affordability, those people who buy those homes, and the politicians say they sit empty. I don't know an investor, rich or poor, when he buys a product that lets it sit empty at the end of the day. This argument needs to be out there and debated at the end of the day, right? And, you know, we're probably one of the few companies that sell to that top end. And, you know, most of those investors do buy a fair bit of our product. But at the end of the day, it never sits empty. It keeps London open, right? And that's not as simple a challenge as I've said. I mean, you know, the government, I recognise, got a big challenge with Brexit. How do we answer ODU? How do we answer some of these problems? How do we keep these bankers in this city? Where do we get the passport from? The Chamber's been working. You know, you take our labour force. I mean, Barclays today has 16,000 people working for it, right? That's 4,000 people less than we really want. We can't build anything in 20 weeks because of the skill shortage. It's taken us 40 weeks. That adds the cost, that adds the prelims. That labour force dropped to 12,000 this summer, right? And we can't pick it up. And that means that some of that labour is already going home. I throw some of this in. There's no bullets, but there are some of the challenges. And it's too easy for politicians, and William's been a great politician, so I'm sure he'll come back on some of this. But it's too easy to say that we haven't done enough education, we haven't had enough apprenticeships at the end of the day, right? But, you know, these are the challenges we're facing. But and then the small developer. I mean, you know, I always like to live close to the market. I like to understand the market. I like to listen to what everybody's got to say about the market. You know, but the small developer, he's not being out by the banks. He's going bankrupt, you know, and he's going bankrupt fast at the moment because, you know, by definition, if he operates in the southeast, and we're all a bit London-focused here today, but by definition, he's building homes that are somewhere up around £1.5 to £2 million. That's the end of the market. He's suffering. The banks are not helping him. He doesn't enjoy the margins that we enjoy. He can't carry the pain. And they're the very people that we want. They used to build 50,000 of this country's homes. They generally used to build the local extension. So they're good news for the economy. They employ, they turn out the economy. And, you know, we've got to get politicians to look at that sort of thing at the end of the day. So the small developer is important to us. And then my favourite subject, right? And I go right back to this supply argument. We've got to get this supply moving, right? We're bogged down in too much detail. Somebody put a line around the country in 1947 and we called it Green Belt. Like all things we do in this country, that was many years ago. And I would like to see the local authorities review the Green Belt. You know, let's not have a debate about NIMBYism. Let's not get everybody excited about it. And I have a simple view about what is Green Belt. If your children can play on it, if your mother and father can walk on it, if your grandparents can walk on it, enjoy it, then it's Green Belt. But if it's a scrapyard, if it's a gravel pit, if it's been locked up and it's had a fence around it for 60, 70 years, it is not green belt. That green belt should be put back into uses at prices that are sensible, because it has no value today, and it should help us produce those homes that we need at prices people can afford. And, you know, there wouldn't be anybody in this developing room today that understands the product. They couldn't come up with 2 or 3 sites or more that could be put back into production. So, you know, we're not challenging Greenbelt, and I think that needs to get reclassified. It wants to look at, and we need to get these housing numbers moving. I think that's enough, don't you, William?
I think we could listen to this. Whether or not it's enough, we could listen to this for a long time. But however, I think we have got the message, which is your message is let the supply loose in many different ways. And you've given some specific ideas about that, including just now reclassifying the scrapyards and gravel pits of the green belt. But you made a lot of other points as well about how to get the supply moving. So let's see what the others think about this, and we should be able to put some of these points to James Murray later on. So let's get the perspective on the challenges for the new mayor and what can be done to bring this all together. James Lydgate, do you want to go next?
Sure. I've got the benefit, I suppose, of working at Legal in General, of being able to think slightly longer term than I did when I worked for house builders, when I was sort of always thinking about what's my half-year figures, what's my full-year figures. I can't think as long-term as some of my colleagues that are thinking where our investment's going to be in 50 or 60 years, but I can certainly think about where do we want to be in 5 and 10 years, and what needs to happen today to make sure that those targets are met. One of those areas is moving away from the government's obsession with home ownership as a means to drive housing delivery. I'm pleased to see that that's starting to happen now. That's certainly an area that we've been focused in over the last couple of years with building up our pipeline on build to rent. That's about £1 billion now that we've committed to that sector. Tony's mentioned it, it was mentioned on previous panels, but new entrants into the marketplace, SME, house builders, new entrants into the supply chain. That needs to happen if we're going to build the homes that we need to within London. You can't solely look towards well-capitalised businesses like Barclay and L&G to do that. We're definitely major players in the market, but we need the SMEs to come in behind us and deliver schemes that are too small for us to concentrate on. Another area is how we can drive capacity in the construction industry. We're not going to build the homes that we need with the construction industry in its current form. Off-site construction is an area that, again, we're focused on. We're building a factory which has got a lot of publicity up in Leeds. That's a 600,000 square foot factory. At capacity, that could build about 3,500 homes a year, fully modularised within the factory. But that's not the solution to all of the issues within construction. We've also got to look at the supply chain and how we work more collaboratively with subcontractors, suppliers like Hansgrohe, and the HBF came up with an interesting piece of research recently that said only 50% of subcontractors into the supply chain believe that they're going to be able to meet the needs of house builders over the next 3 years. And if that's the case, and if that's true, then we've got a major issue as an industry to build the homes that we need. And the last point that I'd like to raise that, again, we're looking at very closely is how we're going to bridge some of the intergenerational unfairness that's been driven into the housing market over, frankly, a generation and a half. And that's not just the equity that people over at the age of 60 have within their homes, but it's also how we drive mixed communities. And mixed communities often means how do we drive a mixed tenure, but we should also be looking at how we deliver homes that suit people at different stages of life. Again, there was a piece of research recently, and if you're a child born into one of the 25 biggest cities in the UK, then only 5% of your neighbours are going to be aged over 65. Compared to approximately 20% of the UK population. So if we're not building homes that are going to suit people in later life alongside all of the other tenures that we need to within London, then there's going to be a huge issue there.
Right, thank you. Well, those are all huge issues. Homes for later in life. Is the supply chain ready to respond to an increased housing construction? The whole issue of intergenerational fairness. These are vast political and social issues. We'll come back to as many of them as we can. Let's now take the perspective from Lang O'Rourke of Stephen.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Mic's working. I mean, first of all, I think I think we should all be pleased that housing actually is high on everyone's agenda and on all the politicians' agenda. I do worry a little bit about, is that a lot of talk? Because actually what we need is some real action, but it's good that it's up there. In terms of the mayor, I'm really pleased to see that we've got a high level sort of vision about what he wants for housing. And two of the key clear areas for that around, doubling the amount of supply that's out there, and that important thing of making a number of the homes that we supply actually more affordable, both for rent and for ownership. And whilst I think that's a hugely ambitious vision, because quite frankly it's never been delivered before, certainly for an awful long time, I think it is incumbent for us as leaders, for us as businesses, to step up to the mark and actually and do something about that and help deliver that vision. And I think there's many companies that are out there, including my own, that are up for the challenge. That said, I think that in order to deliver that vision, there has to be some changes. There has to be something that's happened differently than's happened before. First of all, I think we really do need a very, very clear plan about how do you do some of those things. And I think part of where I think that comes from for me is something that Tony picked up on, which is around the real focus should be not on what's been delivered existing, but actually about what's the additionality. The additionality is 25,000 additional homes. Let's focus in on how do we do that. And I think that that would really start to get some momentum if we do. Secondly, I think that the market would benefit from some real disruption. And I think I think there's two key elements to that. I think one is around, I think we do need some new models about how we do things, and I think we also need some different players. And we talked about SMEs, we've talked about the local authorities getting, playing a bigger role. I also think the construction industry, my industry, can also play a part in that. And one example I would give at the moment, the government is trialling something called direct commissioning. And I think that could potentially be, if it works in the way that it could do, I think that could be a real game changer, because it involves both a different model and it involves different potential players. And thirdly, and it has been touched on a few times today, is this issue. We do need a clear plan around the issue of delivering capacity across our industry. And this is a particular issue in London, but it's across the whole of the country, which is our construction industry, my construction industry, is already struggling with the current capacity. To double sort of output for us, I mean, I just can't see how you can continue to do that with hand-built homes. So off-site construction, more intelligent construction delivery methods, in my view, is absolutely got to be a key part of that plan. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a lot of speakers coming back to the point that actually, even if many things were unblocked, the capacity then to actually construct the number of houses that people are talking about is constrained. So another issue that we need to return to. So let's take Darren next from Barking and Dagenham and get his perspective. As I mentioned earlier, a borough with some massive house building plans. What are your thoughts about these issues and how we're going to make the most of it in the future.
We've got to stop talking and start do some action. Quite frankly, politicians are very good at chattering, especially at the highest level.
Thank you very much.
They're I call it Dagenham Direct. If they don't like to hear it, they don't have to listen. The truth of the matter is, London's dying. It's dying because we've got the wrong policies for the capital city. That's killing the rest of the country. We as a council, we're looking at 43,000 homes in our borough alone. I would ask why the other boroughs are not looking at the same. I have some sympathy with the house builders, it's fair to say, but also you're part of the problem because you just think about people wanting to buy your properties. The fact is, London wasn't built on home ownership. It was built on the rented sector. There's £90 billion in the sector for the institutional PRS world now. That's something we're looking at as a council. We were the first council to do that 5 years ago. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for the house builder, the traditional house builder. But London now is two extremes. The extreme of, if you're in need, you go to the council and we'll give you a poor building somewhere in a poor part of London, normally my borough. Yeah? Or the other option is you buy a house which is ridiculously priced that no one can actually afford unless you're in a very well-to-do job. Now, as a leader of the London Borough, I can't afford to buy in my own borough now. That is ridiculous. That is unsustainable, and it is a mistake of what we've done by selling off housing stock and not supporting the most vulnerable in our society. It is wrong, in my opinion, that you've got people who are living in very expensive properties and homeless people on our streets. And you're seeing it all across London now. It doesn't matter if it's in the poorest borough like mine or a very rich borough. I see it wherever I go. We've got it wrong. And it's how we collectively make an answer. Now, I think Sadiq started well. I think what he's trying to do is say, you know what, we have to have more of a social conscience. You know, and I agree, some of the councils are ridiculous on what they're asking for. You've got to be practical about where we can go. Now, as a council, we've done our own PRS. We've got our own social. But if you look at what the government's predicting, the pay to stay, it will affect 7,000 households in my borough. A third of my stock will disappear because I owe the government X amount of money. Now, that is not good for London. That is not good for you guys. So it's about how we get together and come up with a product that works for everyone. And it has to be mixed tenure, and it has to be achievable. Greenbelt is important. Actually, you don't want to live in a concrete jungle. But at the same time, having 20 golf courses in one London borough, I think is a bit excessive. You know, we can't keep doing this. You can't have my borough saying, yes, we're open for business and we'll do what we need to do, and in another London borough saying, you know what, we want an extra golf course. The last 19 weren't good enough. And that's what we've got. We've got to start talking about London pulsing, and then we've got to start talking about the new towns. So why is Ebbsfleet being such a long-winded situation? Why are we not saying, well, actually, local boroughs, we still have the money, we still want to invest, let's build Ebbsfleet. If it's not Ebbsfleet, let's look along the coastline. Let's start talking about how can we actually improve on places like Harlow, how can we improve on the towns built in the 60s, because actually they can be improved on. They were good in their time, but actually the quality of build was pretty shoddy. And we're knocking a lot of it down now. And it's really important that what we get is good quality build. So it's regeneration today, but heritage tomorrow. And I say this because actually in my borough, it was the first social housing built in 1921, which was the Beckentry Estate. 27,000 homes built over 12 years with all the infrastructure. So let's not mess about who pays for what roads and who does what school and who does, because actually what we're supposed to be doing is building a society that all of us want to see. And at the moment, what we're actually building is a gated society of the haves and the have-nots. So let's get real with it. Let's stop all the politicians talking and get on with the job. And I mean that from the top down, because actually at the moment, the only people that are suffering is actually your future generations.
So, well, very clear view. The London of extremes, the building of gated communities, need for housing policies with a social conscience. Very clear view. We must come back to how you'll all want to discuss how to reconcile that with all the other needs that, that have been expressed during the course of the morning. So before we do that, let's take the contribution of the final member of the panel, Michael Scorby. You can particularly talk about whether that supply chain is ready to respond and any other points you want to make.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, at Hansgrohe, we've been working with major developers in London for the past 25 years, the likes of the Barclay Group. As a manufacturer, we're quite unique, actually, in a way. There's a big stretch in our brand. We have the Hansgrohe brand, and we also have the Axel brand, which is more at the luxury end. But we're in quite a unique position that we work on many schemes, from housing associations right up to five-star hotels. So we've got quite a good understanding of, from all levels of the market. And we understand, particularly with developers, the sort of challenges that you face, whether it's with satisfying shareholders, planning requirements, delivering affordable homes. But for us, it's all about delivering best value. What we want to do is to support you by providing quality and innovative products. And really, this morning with the panel, what I wanted to do was just ask 3 questions, really, that are of concern to ourselves. First of all, is there a recognition that we need to maintain and enhance standards within the industry? We're concerned that quality might be compromised in the rush to deliver more homes. Obviously, the acceleration in housing is going to put a lot of pressure on the water supply and the environment. As a company, we've invested over £3 million in recent years in obtaining RAS approvals, and we just want to know that these areas aren't going to be compromised in the rush to deliver more homes. So that would really be my first question around standards. Secondly, with regard to the supply chain, again, what's been done to involve the supply chain in planning for these additional homes? For us as a manufacturer, it's important that if we understand the plan, then we can help our clients in delivering this plan in a much more efficient way, whether through improved design, innovation, logistics. So again, it's important that as manufacturers we're involved in these plans. And thirdly, finally, perhaps a question for James is, what should the government be doing more in terms of promoting modular construction? By encouraging innovation and investment in this sector, can we deliver more homes more quickly?
Right, adding to the questions in front of us, but obviously pertinent questions that will help the supply chain to respond. So let's look at some of these questions, because we've had some quite different perspectives, and we heard at the beginning, Tony talked about many of the needs of the industry to let loose the supply. Is there common ground, Tony, between what you were saying and what Darren was saying? Is there a lot of scope there for your industry, all the firms you work with, to be able to fulfill his sort of vision?
Well, I have a very simple view about it. Most people know we're redeveloping an old council estate called Kidbrooke. When we won the tender on Kidbrooke, it was 2,000 homes. Today, it's 5,700 homes, and where I agree with Daryl completely is we were taking 400 homes a year off that because we mixed the product. So the product on Kidbrooke is 38% affordable with different tenures, so we are doing something for everybody. Those 2 tenures, private, and I hate the word social, I think it's something else to be changed, but it gets us there quickly, sit comfortably side by side, but that's giving people back their respect. The other product is extra care. That's something that we've worked on. I sat on the extra care panel on 4 different occasions at All Best, and that is looking at that. And again, we need the politicians from the top to the bottom.
I'm glad I've retired from all of this. Yeah.
To accept that, at the end of the day, we had another very interesting debate with one of the London boroughs about this. We wanted to put 100 extra care units on one of their sites. They said those dear old ladies, for some reason those dear old ladies outlived the men, I don't know why. But at the end of the day, they actually don't want to live in their 3-bedroomed house, their 4-bedroomed house. They don't want to get up in a cold day and go and get on a bus and ride out. They actually want to live in the centre of the towns pretty much where these things. So, you know, we had those dear old ladies queue for that and they were social. So it is a question of balance. It's a question of getting that production up. But I'd like to make this last point because I think this is where it is. And the other day I was at a meeting with government and it was an interesting discussion. Berkeley have lost. You know, we're not fussed about what we lose. I am on the day sometimes and the week after sometimes. But, you know, I saw the decision most of you seen on the Aylesbury estate. Well, we won the tender on the Aylesbury estate. I can't remember precisely, but more than 15 years ago, right? This best value argument that goes on is what is best value, politicians? Is it people's lives? Is it extra homes? Is it additionality? Is it full? What is best value? This tender process where we go through it under something called ODU, and it generally costs large groups like us 1 million and 2 million, and most people can't afford it. What for? What does it achieve? So I'm with you, Darryl, right? Let's loosen it up. You know, we have these laws for the 1% that don't behave. Sorry about this, William, I go on sometimes. But at the end of the day, I think this is an important debate, you know, and a lot of you know those sites. They're locked up, and even when we win one, we're just in the process of winning another big one. It's a very interesting debate. About 3 days after that dear woman, Jo Cox, got stabbed, right? I was there. I arrive in the morning, rah, 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 lots of attention because I'm there, right? The cabinet are out of this particular local authority, fantastic. All the officers are out, fantastic. The MP arrives at 9:30, fantastic. We got in this bloody great flash coach down to this council estate we go. And it's as big as your council estate, so I've got to be careful. Yeah, and it's in an area where it's £300 a square foot, which I would argue, Darryl, is the bottom end of where, or the top end of where it's affordable. We go in this estate, we get out, we're all suited up, as you can imagine, we're all smiling at each other. Photographers everywhere, because this is the rare moment of success. And then a gang of chaps, where's Captain Pete, he was with me, my age, they didn't want to scrap. They call us effing W's for the ladies in it. And the trouble is, when you don't say it, it doesn't come across. Call us effing wankers, right? And so there I am standing with FP, and we're all given these rude names, right? And anyway, MP goes one way, we go across the road and we talk to him. 15 years, Darryl, this council estate's been coming. 15 years. The precinct is shut up and boarded up. The graffiti's everywhere. There's dead cars everywhere. There's not a seat. There's not a tree. So we go in the cafe room, do we not? Okay. And we have a cup of tea with them. 1% salary rise for the last 6 years. If we don't get this aspiration of the working class people right, we won't get this sorted. And that's the message, and that is what came through on Brexit. They weren't voting about whether we stay in or out. It was a process about the politics in this country, and we need to recognise it. And I agree with Darryl. Let's get it, whether it's Greenbelt, whether it's council estates, there's no shortage. Let's get on with it, and we will, you know, legal in general, people like us, we've got our own modern methods of construction coming along. We will face into the challenge. The industry will rise to the challenge, and let's get on and build it. And yes, we should maintain the quality. Thank you. Sorry.
Very good, I think. Right, no, well, on that inspiring note, let's go out to the floor to see if anybody's got any questions or comments they want to make on anything that the panel have raised. Who would like to make a point? Yes, sir, at the back. Let's get the microphone over to you.
Peter Girling's Retirement Rentals. And this is a question for Darren, and I'd be very interested to know how many underoccupied homes you have in your borough, and how many homeless families do you have, and what increasing provision is there for retirement housing, perhaps to rent in those boroughs, to perhaps help encourage people to move out of the underoccupied homes? Thank you.
We don't have as many as others, because actually we have the lowest take-up of people buying their homes in the first place in London. We had a massive exodus when Ford's left. So we were a mining town of the north, if you like, but in the south. One big employer. So we had this massive exodus, and the borough's now split up in a third, and a third. So we've got a third of people buy and live, like me, There's a third of social, and then the third is buy-to-let. So there's about 18,000 buy-to-let properties in the borough. It's absolutely destroying our community. It's destroyed our community because what's actually happened is people care about money over people. And that's that social responsibility bit. I've got no problem with what Tony talks about. In fact, Kidbrooke, I think, is a brilliant example of a terrible rundown estate. And I know that I knew what it was like before to what it is today. And I'm really pleased to see that sort of tenure. If you then talk about our old people, we as a council have been investing in our PRS, our institutional PRS, and we've been building bungalows specially made for them in the locations of where they want to live, because they've lived there for 40, 50, 60 years. So we're trying to support them from moving out of 3-bed into 1. So there's a whole plethora of problems, and our biggest problem is we're the cheapest part of London. So actually, at the moment, we probably have about 3,500, 4,000 families from other London boroughs in our borough because it's cheaper for those councils to put them there. Unfortunately for us, it also comes with lots of social problems because these are sometimes not the most proactive of families. And it's how do we then manage that? We are the third poorest borough in London today as it stands. It's being made poorer because of poor decisions right from the top, and then actually we then need to look at a London solution on how we can deliver it. How can it be right that Central London and West London, which are a lot more affluent than we are, get much more subsidy in supporting, whether it be housing build, whether it be pricing. We've got to start making a fair balance across London and all of us looking at it as a collective responsibility rather than isolated pockets of responsibility.
And is that something, Darren, that you're expecting the new mayor to do, to be able to redistribute that support?
We're already having that conversation. I mean, the mayor was good enough to sign off Barcelona-on-Thames 2 weeks ago for us, which is the new Riverside development. That's just short of 11,000 homes. 50% of those will be affordable. Now, I get really scared about affordable and social. When I was a young council lad back in the day, social meant getting on with your neighbours. It didn't have this air of you haven't achieved, which it does today, and that really scares me. And affordable, well, what is affordable? Affordable, they say, is 80% of market rent. Well, if you take my borough, everything in my borough is affordable to the rest of London. So we've got to start actually having a proper conversation about where we want to see the capital go. And I do think the mayor has started really well. I think James understands it, and we've had some really productive conversations. So I'll give you 3 things we are doing as a council. The PRS, we were the first to do 5 years ago. You then look at artist accommodation. Artists are leaving by droves. They're going to Berlin. We're building PRS Live Workspace for artists. It's starting at London Living Wage. That's quite an achievement. And the other thing we're doing is we don't want to sell our council stock. It's a flawed policy. Sorry, William. But
I'm going to hear as the chair, don't worry.
It was flawed. It was flawed when I was a kid, when we sold it off for only 30% of its true value. It's still flawed 40 years on. Okay, we've got to stop it in London. We've got to say, you know what, we want you to be aspirational because I'm working class and I'm aspirational, same as Tony. The difference is, though, his house is probably bigger than mine. But the truth is that aspiration goes from the council estate to the millionaire's home. We need to give that aspiration back to the people that actually makes London flourish. Because it is the people, not the big people at the top, it's the rest of the people that do the work on a daily basis that will build the homes that will make London great.
Very good. Now, anybody got, we're going to listen to James Murray in a moment. Anybody got a question before that? A lot of strong statements being made here on the panel.
We haven't scared them off, have we?
No, they're thinking hard. And just following at the point that was raised earlier about the ability of the supply chain to respond, am I right in thinking from what you've all said that if somebody could come along, if some all-powerful and wise Minister of Housing and London Mayor came along and unblocked all the problems that prevent us from building the necessary number of houses, it would then be a great struggle in the industry to come up with the amount of capacity that is necessary. Have we understood that correctly?
Yes, I think you have.
Yes, Stephen?
I mean, and the point I would make on that, I mean, it is a very complex area as well, because it's over a period of time that the construction industry has got itself into the place that it's got itself into. It's wholly reliant in the main on subcontractors, and that's why from a Laing O'Rourke point of view, actually we believe in direct delivery. We have our own apprenticeships. You know, a lot of the people that work on our sites actually we employ directly because we feel that's the right way to move, but it's not the way the industry is moved. And if you hand build homes, which is the way I describe it, in the way that traditionally we've done things, quite frankly, we just cannot increase supply on that basis. The average age of a lot of the trades out there, whether they be the steel workers or the carpenters or whatever, 50 to 55 is where the average age of a lot of the trades are. And we cannot get people, we cannot encourage people to come in at the other, you know, the starter end. And the real reason for that is actually it's not about the schools or the colleges. A lot of it is us. You know, if I asked you in this room, anyone to stick their hand up that has an aspiration for their child to be a bricklayer or a carpenter, there are very, very few. And it is, Tony, isn't it? There are very, very few. And that's a real problem. It starts right at the grassroots level, which is around us and around aspiration. Actually, it's one of the best things you could possibly do. But we just haven't got that across to people, and we've lost that along the way. And the only answer, I think, honestly, is we keep doing what we're doing with the hand-built stuff. That's great, but we then need to substitute that alongside that with off-site intelligent solutions, which happened in every other industry, bar the construction industry.
Well, yes, quick point to this, then we'll move on. Yeah.
On that, though, that's about policy again. Because our young people cannot do apprenticeships at the money they're talking about and live in London. And they can't live with their parents because actually they didn't get penalised for that as well. So it is about genuine good policy that's going to make us develop those trades that we need.
Because I do think, look, Berkeley made an open commitment, right? And my people will correct me if I get the number wrong. We have 263 apprentices today, do we not? We have nearly 1,500 young people we're taking out of council estates that we're training. That's the promise we made. And what happens? Central government changed the CITB. It's going to cost Berkeley an additional £4 million a year, and we got a major skill shortage. Where is central government on these debates? You know, we need the mayor arguing this for us in the day. I mean, we had a session on it yesterday morning. This levy on apprenticeships is absolutely ridiculous when we're trying to encourage jobs.
Right, well, no, very good. And you got a new Minister of Housing. In fact, we always have a new Minister of Housing. This point was made earlier. We've had a new one for about 20 years now. And we obviously need him here, Rupert, at these, in the future debates of this kind. But we are very fortunate because we have somebody else who's in a very, very influential position, and reference has been made to him in conjunction with the work of the new mayor, and that's James Murray, Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development. And he's been doing other things this morning, but he has managed to get here in time to give us some closing remarks and thoughts without the benefit, or maybe with the benefit of not having heard what has gone before. But we've had some fascinating views and exchanges, and there couldn't be a more appropriate person to round this off. So, James, please join us. Or speak from the lectern as you wish. Thank you very much for coming along.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me along here today. And I'm here in my role that I was given by the new Mayor of London, and I hope his tenure is longer than the new Housing Minister in City Hall. It's also quite nice. This is the first event I've done in my new role back in Islington, which is my old stomping ground until May. So it's very nice to be here for that reason. But actually, it's quite instructive, I think, to say that I haven't actually been back to Islington, apart from to sleep occasionally, since I was appointed to this role in May, because really my focus for the last few months has been to go right around London, to meet councils right across the capital of all political backgrounds, to meet housing associations, developers, home builders, investors, Londoners, businesses, and so on from every part of the capital, because I think I really started this role with the realization of how important it was to build that alliance across London of everyone who's involved in building homes for Londoners. And what's really struck me in every event I've spoken at and every meeting I've had and every visit I've done is how in the vast majority of what we want to do together, we have consensus. We have agreement. There are details around the edges that we need to go into further discussion about, but there's a huge amount in the middle of what we want to do, which we all agree on. And I'll just run through briefly some of the things which I think bring us all together. I think firstly, it goes almost without saying that we acknowledge the scale of the housing crisis. And I think what's really important about what binds together the coalition in London who are determined to tackle the housing crisis is the wide spread of views there are all around the issue of building new homes. So one of the early events I did was to launch a report jointly sponsored by Peabody Housing Trust and the CBI about the business case for affordable housing, which I think is a nice simple example of an event which is quite commonplace these days, bringing together historic housing trusts, business interests and Londoners, recognising the importance of housing not just for the social diversity of London but also for the economic success of the capital. And I think beyond that, what everyone realises is there are a few fundamentals that we need to address, and I'll go through a few of them in turn. Firstly, land. I'm sure land has come up as a point of discussion today, and we all know that any discussion you have about increasing supply of housing ends up with a discussion at some point about land. So what we've been very keen to do from City Hall's point of view is to lead by example by bringing forward public sector land, and in particular the TfL sites, which are controlled by the Mayor. So one of the first things the Mayor has done in his first 100 days, he did in August, is bring forward one of the first TfL sites for development. It's a site at Kidbrooke in Greenwich, which he's brought forward to deliver 400 homes, of which half will be affordable. And I think by doing that and by following it up with further sites coming forward from TfL's portfolio, we can lead by example and show that the public sector really can do something about that. Now, I think although the Mayor can lead by example on TfL land, what's really important for us to do next is to address the issue of the wider public sector land estate, because we all know there's a lot of public land in London. The difficulty is clearly making it ready to bring to market and bringing it to market in an attractive way. And if I look back on some of the work which was done by the previous mayoralty, I think it's quite instructive about how we can build on that. So the previous mayoralty did the London Land Commission, which was a very useful piece of work in doing an audit of all of the land which is held by the public sector within the capital. But as I have pointed out at a few events, so forgive me if you've heard this anecdote before, it really is an extensive audit of everything owned by the public sector, including number 10 Downing Street as a public sector landholding. Now, that's clearly not a developable site anytime soon, but it does show that this audit was done very thoroughly to identify the land, but not necessarily with a view to what is readily developable or can be brought to market quickly. So what we're doing at City Hall now is moving on beyond the point data, which is analysed through the London Land Commission, to mapped data. So we can see that the size of the sites, where sites adjoin each other, if you've got different public sector landowners side by side, and working with the individual public sector agencies to develop a programme through which these sites can be brought forward. Now, I'll be honest and say that is sometimes quite hard work, working with all the NHS trusts, working with the MOD, working with Network Rail to coordinate them together. But I think it's imperative that we in the public sector lead by example. And if we do that, we can then start having broader conversations about how we reform land assembly and land management in the capital to increase the supply of land. And I've been very encouraged by our initial understanding of what is in the neighbourhood planning bill, which has gone before Parliament recently, strengthening, for instance, the ability of the TfL and the GLA to assemble land. I think there's a lot of mileage there, and I hope the government is open to ideas about how we can help bring land forward. I think secondly, there's a question about investment. And investment discussions usually start with a discussion about the Affordable Housing Fund, because it's obviously a big pot of money, which we believe London should get a decent share of. But I think rather than focusing on the actual amount of money, because there will obviously be discussions about that, what I think is really important from our point of view is that that money supports a range of different tenures. So we know that if we want to encourage first-time buyers and support them into home ownership in London, we need different routes to home ownership. So there might be different sorts of home ownership products which are appropriate for different first-time buyers, depending on their income, their access to deposits, and so on. And if we are going to increase supply, I think what everyone agrees with now is that we need different tenures and different delivery models coming forward. So that means within London, a range of products for first-time buyers, rented products alongside them to make sure that we're hitting all the different price points and tenures across the market. And I think that's a really important point that we've been making at City Hall, and I think is reflected in the broader debate across the industry, that having different products at different price points is quite essential to making sure we increase overall supply. And there's a bigger point as well about public sector investment, in that it shouldn't simply be used, in our view, in terms of grant, giving grant for individual schemes on a case-by-case basis, but we should use it more creatively and innovatively to support, for instance, housing associations' programs over the medium term. So if housing associations come forward with their delivery program for the next few years, we want to work out a contractual relationship with them about how we can support them to build new homes over that medium-term period. And I think crucially as well, we should be using public sector investment to make development more attractive, to leverage in private sector investment as well. So if you see what we're doing in some of the housing zones at the moment, we are using that public sector investment to unlock sites, put in the infrastructure, to make them ready for market, to assemble land, to make whatever intervention is necessary to make the overall scheme more attractive for a range of builders and a range of investors. And then thirdly, I'll just flag up about planning, because planning is clearly a huge issue. The treatment of affordable housing within the planning system is something which has been battered around and tossed around a lot. The definition of affordable itself is up for some question. We could probably spend a whole session just on what we mean by the term affordable. And I think to come back to my earlier point about the consensus which really underlies all of the discussions which I've been having over the last few months, there's a real consensus that if we're going to talk about affordable housing in the planning system, clarity, certainty, and speed would be welcomed by people from every part of the debate. And to that end, we are currently drafting some supplementary planning guidance, which we hope to publish in draft this autumn, which will set out a more clear and consistent and speedier way to tackling the thorny issue of viability assessments, which have slowed down planning applications, which have added delay for the applicants, which have added confusion for the councils and their members. If we can give some clarification about how viability assessments could be conducted in a more clear and consistent manner, we think that would benefit people all round. But I think it's not just about affordable housing. I think there are other things we can use planning to do. I think we need to use it to identify that greater capacity within London for more homes, which we all know is essential. And the Mayor has made very clear his position on the Greenbelt, for instance, about its protection. But that does mean, therefore, we are going to have difficult conversations about how do we build London in a more dense manner. And I think that part of that discussion is having that public debate with Londoners about what does well-designed higher density residential accommodation look like, so that people don't hear the word high density and think the only way of doing that is a 50-story tower, but they can also recognize that you can get some very well-designed, very attractive high-density residential accommodation at 4 stories, 6 stories, 10 stories, whatever. But the mid-rise options are going to be a really important part to the mix. And finally, on planning, I think the other thing we can do in that field to really support extra delivery is support the build-to-rent sector. And over the last few months, one thing which comes up again and again and again is the importance of build to rent, not just in terms of accessing new sources of institutional investment in housing, but also delivering genuinely additional supply. So alongside the crucial and important role that we want to protect that volume home builders play, we also recognize that we need other models of delivery alongside them, and we feel like build to rent can fill some of that gap as well. So to bring that all together, I think it's really clear there are so many aspects about land assembly, about investment, about planning, and where there is consensus. And we know at City Hall that we're not going to be able to deliver on our own. We need to work with the industry, with everyone involved in building homes for Londoners to make that a reality. And so to help drive that, the Mayor has committed to setting up Homes for Londoners as a team across City Hall, which will bring together all the existing capacity in terms of housing, land, planning, and development functions within City Hall and the GLA group. And he's authorized a skills and capacity audit of what we have within the GLA family. So if we look across all of the capacity we have at City Hall and realize we need to bolster some capacity in certain ways to help drive development, to help unlock opportunities, that's what we're going to be doing over the coming months. And this whole team, the whole work of this team, their outputs and their what they do will be overseen by a Homes for Londoners board that will be chaired by the mayor himself. And I think that sends a message of how important it is to him personally. So I'll just finish by saying, you know, there's a lot of ambition at City Hall. There's a lot of ambition right across London. We need to be honest by saying this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. I think with housing, even more than any other area of delivery, there isn't a single magic wand you can wave in order to fix the crisis. But I have no doubt that given the strength of commitment and the strength of ideas and the strength of passion to get this sorted across London, we will make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, James. Everybody has called all morning for joined-up thinking, for people to work together. There he is saying that is going to happen across boroughs, across parties, on land, on planning, on investment. So that was an important thing to hear. Do you have time for 2 quick questions?
2 quick questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody got a question? We're going to conclude our whole program in a few minutes. Who has this is your chance to ask the Deputy Mayor what you've always wanted to ask or tell him. Yes, sir. Yes, you and then Colin, and then that will stop there. Yeah.
James, you mentioned in what you were saying, assisting the housing association. I'll attach local authorities to that. Not necessarily with grant, but with other interventions. And given rent cuts, given the difference between welfare benefits that have impacted so many local authorities and housing associations, what do you think those interventions will actually look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the, I speak partly from my experience with my old hat on here as well. I think part of scaling up local authorities' ability to build more homes is the capacity they have within the local authorities to manage projects and to work out what delivery model might be best to deliver homes. So just this morning, for instance, we met with Croydon, who set up their Brick by Brick company, which is a really exciting development. It's a company which can then operate in different ways than local authority, not subject to OJU, for instance. Has a very different kind of expertise it's bringing in, can do things in a different way. That model might work very well in Croydon, but other authorities might have a different way of doing it. That innovation is good, but we shouldn't necessarily wait for everyone to reinvent the same wheel again and again. So we want to have a role at City Hall in terms of sharing those ideas and expertise amongst councils to make sure the councils can strengthen their capacity in-house to drive forward development. I think beyond that, there are other points which we clearly agree on about, it would be a good thing if councils were able to retain their right to buy receipts with slightly more flexibility so that they could reinvest them more flexibly rather than the current system. And there's a clear argument for councils to be able to invest prudentially in building new homes. So I think it's a question about capacity, whether in terms of the people there to drive forward the programme within the councils and the resources that they have available. And I think if we can help there, as well as more general interventions through helping with expertise on land assembly, viability, and so on, we can support councils to deliver homes. Because if I go back to my general point about the overall increase in supply needing different delivery models, different products, different price points, and different vehicles, and so on, councils are going to be part of that mix.
Colin Stanbridge, London Chamber of Commerce. Been delighted this morning that many of the themes that we've been developing in the Chamber, especially the business case for housing, have been echoed here today, London Land Commission, but especially, actually, the small builder. It's something Tony Pidgeoney, our President, has been very passionate about, and we are very passionate about in terms of trying to encourage more small builders. We've heard about the dramatic loss of small builders and small developers. We've come up with a number of ideas about sills payments being after you've sold the property, help from the banks. Is there anything that you think the Mayor can do to encourage the creation of an army of small builders? Because it's frankly the only way we're going to be building the 50,000 homes that you and I and everyone in this room wants.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to highlight that, because if you look at the numbers of homes built by small builders in the last few years, it's gone right down. And to link to the other point as well about the different routes of delivery, the different ways that we can get that overall supply number up, small builders have to play a role. I think there might well be a role in terms of sites we bring forward through TfL, for instance. So the current sites are the big sites. A lot of them are zone 1 and 2, going through a property partnership panel which is already established. But what we'll be looking at is whether there are opportunities in future sites, particularly smaller sites in outer London, for small and medium builders to get involved there. So we can lead by example. I think there are also bigger issues about how do we make the way easier for small builders through helping with finance, helping with planning, so that they don't have to take the same planning risk. And those would be discussions which we want to have, over the coming months. I think what we're hoping for, exactly for issues like that, is through the Homes for Londoners board, we want them to be able to commission, for a want of a better word, task and finish reports. So that if the mayor says, right, I want to support X, or I want to find out how we can do, what interventions might be necessary to support Y, we can use the Homes for Londoners board to access the expertise of the whole sector, the whole industry, to come up with some recommendations. And this is not an excuse to write yet more reports about the scale of the housing crisis. We take that as read. What we want is we want ways that we can intervene, things we can lobby for, ways that we can help support the sector more widely. And that's the kind of thing where we can use the Homes for Londoners structure and the broader alliance around it to come up with those actions.
We have lots of recommendations that we will put into the
Excellent, there you go, brilliant.
Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank James for taking the time in a busy schedule to come to us this morning and give us these early indications of the direction of the new mayor and of his own work. I want to thank this concluding magnificent and passionate panel for their contributions earlier on, and I want to thank WhatHouse and Rupert Bates for having the good sense to bring us all together. And all of you for coming along. It's been a pleasure to meet you. And Rupert, I think you want to round it off.
Yes, basically to say thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to our fantastic panels. I think it's been fascinating and challenging debates. It's been terrific. Thank you to everybody in the audience. I don't know what you're doing here. You should be building houses, so get back out there. I think it's been a fantastic debate. And thank you to our sponsors, to Aldermore, to NHBC and Hansgrohe, and of course to our event partners, London Chamber of Commerce and Industry and WhatHouse magazine. And finally, a big thank you to our chairman for today, who's been absolutely fantastic. I think you'll agree, and I think a big round of applause for Lord Hague, William Hague. Now, of course, William has had a very distinguished political career. There's not many gaps in his CV, but I thought as a little present to fill that final gap in Lord Hague, Baron Hague of Richmond's political CV, I would like to present him he finally makes it to number 10. William.
Thank you. Yes, marvellous. Yes. I don't know how that will go down well in Yorkshire, but however, fly Emirates, that's often a good idea. So, yeah, thank you very much indeed. Great pleasure to join you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and lunch is served. Thank you.